It was all me, James. It's always been me, the author of all your pain.
So with the latest Bond film out, and more crucially, the hype machine around it, I thought it would be a good idea for this struggling channel to attempt to get in on the trickle-down economics of exposure that has become the engine room of YouTube view hunting. Unlike actual trickle-down economics, the trickle-down economics of hype really works with tangible results. As what seems to happen is something like a Bond film arrives on the scene with blanket advertising everywhere, and then content creators come in with their spoofs and critiques, simultaneously cashing in and feeding the hype machine around the film. Will it work for this channel? Well, the Bond film's already been out for 3 weeks. Let's just pretend this whole thing's about Dune. This is a video about the new James Bond film, so there will be spoilers for that. And Julian Assange. There'll be spoilers for him as well. For example, Julian Assange will almost certainly remain in legal purgatory until he's in his 70s, when a magnanimous President Ben Shapiro will pardon the long-forgotten traitor to Western values, and Assange will be forgiven for all the also long-forgotten imaginary crimes that he's done. And then everyone will give themselves a pat on the back for being so humane to Julian Assange, allowing him to die in dignity at a home he's never visited before. But this is boring, isn't it? Let's get back to Bond. So there's something of an SW1 elitism that pervades all Bond films, except maybe the Roger Moore ones, which have a more Soho window cleaner vibe. For example, how on earth does Bond manage to traverse the streets of London without ever passing a Pret-a-Manger, never mind a Tesco? Even when he's in Italy, which is often, you never catch him driving past, say, an Interspar. And it's not that Bond exists in some anachronistic bubble where all signs of modernity have been airbrushed from reality. He is swamped in high-tech gadgets, weaponry and infrastructure. But what is missing throughout all the films is the neon signs, billboards and gaudy shop fronts that make up our own journeys through modernity. For Bond, it's all private members clubs, subtly signposted restaurants and townhouse offices, which we usually associate with private equity firms. It's all very SW1. Bond in a way makes cool something distinctly uncool about British life. He is in many ways just a voice inflection away from Jacob Rees-Mogg. He is elitist, but unlike say Mogg, he's not elite. You can tell this partly due to the product placement that's needed for Bond films, which means that he comes across as incredibly insecure, constantly having to wear only Tom Ford suits and expensive watches and driving luxury cars. There's a real sense of insecurity coming off this man. As the closest thing to an internationally recognised British superhero, Bond doesn't make the British look very good, but I'd say it's quite accurate. So, in the Daniel Craig Bond films, they brought back the old foe of Spectre, but as we find out in this final film, in an almost Freudian twist, it's not MI6 or even the CIA that finally brings Spectre down. No, it's a new villain by the name of Safin. As a younger man, and Black Mirror fan, Safin witnessed his family being killed by Spectre, and then vows to avenge his family's death by going on to build his own evil organisation. In No Time to Die, we're introduced to a Scooby-Dooby newbie called Logan Ash, a CIA agent, who unsurprisingly turns out to be working for, or possibly with, Safin. We, the audience, are presumably meant to infer from this that Ash has defected from the CIA, because Safin is bad, and the CIA, of course, is good. Maybe that's even stated in the film at some point. Bond films are always needlessly difficult to follow, and most of it just goes in one ear and out the other. But what would be more realistic is that the CIA, or at least part of the CIA, is working with Safin, because after all, Safin, like any good Bond villain, is eventually revealed to have a huge, sprawling, secret lair, replete with armed guard scientists and faceless meat drones. And as always in Bond films, the elephant in the room is, how do these villains fund these operations? Forgetting Safin for just a moment, what is it exactly that Spectre does for money? And like ISIS, would it not be a good idea to look at the funding arrangements? Maybe if we just freeze Spectre's assets, stop them from working with any banks, we wouldn't have to go in and blow everything up. If you remember, it's apparently a corrupt CIA section chief that is aiding Quantum, a subdivision of Spectre, and Daniel Craig's second outing as Bond, Quantum of Solace. Again though, in the real world, it was the World Bank who forced the CIA-backed Bolivian government to privatize its water supply in order to receive loans. What you find in these Bond films is, even though they try their darndest to dissuade you of the notion, from all we know about the actual world, it's just far more likely that organisations such as Spectre are, if not directly funded by the CIA, then at least allowed through American blind eye turning to operate within the global financial system. Like most international terrorist groups, for example Al-Qaeda, the most likely explanation for Spectre's ability to even emerge on the global stage is CIA backing. And it would hardly be unprecedented for one group set up by the CIA, i.e. Spectre, to be scuppered by another group set up by the CIA, i.e. whatever Safin's doing. And then for that second group that was set up by the CIA to then go on to threaten US interests themselves, as Safin does. It's a story as old as time, or at least surveilled time. The film was made before the pandemic and written when Julian Assange was still held up in the Ecuadorian embassy. But even in the fantastical, Pretless universe of Bond, the story can't help but clumsily come clanking into reality. Driving the plot forward is a virus-type weapon taken from a lab in a building which I'm pretty sure doesn't actually exist. Either way, this is hugely embarrassing for the authorities, and they attempt to mop things up without other intelligence agencies or indeed the press getting involved. Not that you have to worry about the press really in a Bond film because, like Pret, it doesn't really exist. It appears that the weapon, Heracles, is a secret project of M's, which not even Boris Johnson himself knows about. It all sounds very much like the revelations coming out of Wuhan about US funding of lab experiments. Why are M and Bond meeting up in Hammersmith? Are they worried about being bugged by MI5? Or the CIA? Why is Felix Leiter and Ash hanging out on some kind of fishing trawler which is presumably only a couple of miles off the US coast? Don't the CIA have their own boats? Is this mission taking place off the books? How does Safin take a small army unnoticed into Norway? With CIA help perhaps? How does Safin not only know about the secret Heracles weapon, but also has a contact inside the lab working on the project, and also knows exactly when Spectre is breaking in to steal it? And the fact that this random guy does know all this makes it all the more bizarre that the CIA apparently knows nothing. Except presumably Ash, the CIA agent who is actually working with Safin. He obviously knows things. One starts to wonder who is passing on information to whom. As usual, I was very much caught up in the excitement around the latest Bond film, and in fact was so enthused by the hype that I, like many others I'm sure, went back and watched Casino Royale. So in Casino Royale, this terrorist financier, Le Chiffre, is planning to make a fortune by shorting a company days before it's targeted by a terrorist bombing which he himself is implicated in, and which he's still willing to go through with even after finding out that the bomb maker has been killed by an MI6 agent, James Bond in fact. On a side note, I think it's worth mentioning that Bond kills the bomb maker inside a foreign embassy. Could you imagine such a thing? Hollywood, eh? Also, Le Chiffre is already on the MI6 books. Does he not know this? Basically, this guy appears to be a reckless idiot. And so it's rather strange that an organisation such as Spectre would have anything to do with him. Unless, of course, Spectre don't feel that they need to worry about Five Eyes or Nine Eyes. Because surprise, surprise, it is the CIA again which ends up taking over the plan to interrogate Le Chiffre. Also, Le Chiffre, despite knowing that he will very likely have to give himself up to the CIA that day, seems pretty confident that torturing Bond, an MI6 agent, moments beforehand will have no repercussions. Also, though Bond apparently witnesses Mr. White shooting Le Chiffre, he's on the verge of passing out at the time, and he only sees the gun being fired, not Le Chiffre being hit. At the end of the film, M tells Bond that after losing track of the $100 million or pounds or whatever it was, the trail's gone cold. Which is quite astonishing. I mean, this is supposed to be the mighty British intelligence service we're talking about, right? Just look for massive construction contracts being dished out in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Or say, if someone is hiring a vast amount of cleaning staff to work at an abandoned missile silo on a disputed island between Russia and Japan, maybe ask them where they got the money from. But getting back to No Time to Die, Where the film really comes clanging into our reality is when it's revealed that Blofeld, of Spectre fame, is being held in Belmarsh Prison of all places, which in the real world is where Julian Assange is currently being held. More interesting and more outlandish than any Bond film plot has been the recent revelations that the CIA discussed killing Julian Assange while he was inside the Ecuadorian embassy inside the UK. Did MI6 have any idea about this? Did they know, for example, that many of the people working near the embassy in London were CIA spies? And if an attempt on Assange's life had actually been made, what could MI6 really do about it? I doubt very much they'd declare war on the United States, but would they even dare withdraw the ambassador, for example? Or even just call for those who authorised the plot to be reprimanded in some way? Would the British government ever dare to call for a slap on the wrist? The audacity of the CIA's plan should have made any notion that Assange would get a fair trial in the US completely, well, incredible. And in any sane world, would have led to an investigation into the CIA, which could have resulted in a frank and open debate about what this organisation actually does. And yet, nothing seems to have changed. The threat of Assange being extradited is still very much on the table. What has happened to Assange over the past decade is one of the most shocking crimes of modern times. A man who exposed the crimes carried out by the US is now being held indefinitely via legal jiu-jitsu simply as a message to anyone else who might dare expose that illegal and deadly force is being used by a supposedly democratic state. But despite the gravity of the situation, it's actually extremely difficult to stay interested in what's going on. Despite events surrounding Assange becoming increasingly interesting, shocking, important, and just, well, bizarre, you have to will yourself to even stay engaged with the story. I doubt, for example, I'd have even bothered to make another whole video about Assange if it wasn't for the tenuous link to the latest Bond film. And more to the point, I doubt you would have watched it. The problem is that there is no sense in the wider media that an event of epic proportions is taking place. There is no feeling that we are in the middle of a national/international scandal. With all the other things going on in the world, the story of Assange is drowned out and appears, well, quite dull. The hype around Dune, shows how much power the media has to engage people in certain issues. In a few weeks, Dune will be long forgotten, but the Matrix 4 release will be very much on people's minds. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to resist sitting down and watching the entire trilogy again, re-engaging with the Matrix mythos and political themes, watching video essays and reading interviews. I can't wait, it's going to be so much fun. And even if the film itself is a massive disappointment, it's just really enjoyable to be involved in a collective, emotional event. The hype around films like The Matrix or Bond film is of course on some level manipulation by the media, but it's welcomed manipulation that for the most part is harmless and enjoyable, if not intellectually stimulating. Similarly though, the media is relied upon to open the space for public debate on important issues, such as, for example, the possible extradition of Julian Assange. We need media institutions, such as The Guardian, to amplify, or hype if you will, discussions around injustices, controversies, and new precedents being set by our own lawmakers. The legality of Assange's imprisonment is extremely blurry and relies on a disinterest from the public, a lack of scrutiny, a lack of oversight. His extradition to the US would be the first of its kind, and in years to come, there would almost certainly be many books, documentaries, and feature films made about the shocking events. And if and when they're made, they would no doubt be surrounded with much hype and celebrity gossip, and all the kind of debates that we should be having right now, when it's actually happening.
Welcome back to Film 2041. I'm your host, Barry Normal. On the show today, we have the true-life espionage thriller, Blessed Are the Leaks, starring Carlisle Smedgington, who joins me now.
A pleasure as always, Barry.
What an incredible story. A CIA plot to kill the man while he was living in the Ecuadorian embassy? Hard to believe that this happened in our lifetime. Why is this story not more widely known, do you think, Carlisle?
Well, there was a lot going on at the time. Do you remember that alpaca?
Oh yes, what a guy. And can I just say, that's a fetching hat you're wearing there. What does that say? Labour? Wasn't that a political party or something, once upon a time?
Oh, this? Well, I wouldn't know about that. I just picked it up at Primark.
Oh, burn.
It might seem like irony, but it is in fact consistency that what is happening to Assange today is going unnoticed by the world, just as the crimes he exposed once did. Here's a thought experiment for you. What if the murder of Sarah Everard had been carried out by a military police officer on a member of the Iraqi public? Do you think that officer would have been arrested, or even faced any scrutiny at all? What does the military or any organisation have to gain from transparency? It's naive to expect organisations simply to function with integrity just because they happen to be British or American. All organisations instinctively lurch towards self-preservation over, say, truth and justice. That's why there must always be external pressure, external power, scrutinising their behaviour. From the Met's perspective, the murder of Sarah Everard is not a tragedy, it's an embarrassment. While those directly involved will be punished, the main issue for the Met is distancing itself as an organisation from the event. And it would certainly be easier for them to do this if everything about this whole sorry saga had never seen the light of day, and Wayne Couzens had simply and quietly been moved to indefinite desk duty. Press freedom still exists to some degree in the UK, and in this particular case, the failings of the Met has at least been partly exposed. I say partly because although the details have come out into public view, the narrative framing has as yet not been strong enough to force anyone to resign. All Assange did was attempt to bring the same level of basic scrutiny that we expect from our police to our military. His extradition to the US is not only a threat to this kind of scrutiny taking place in future wars, but also press freedoms here as well. If the actions of the CIA don't need to be scrutinised, why would the actions of MI6, or MI5, or even the Met? Of course, there is another force in the UK that could be hyping the Julian Assange case, and that is the Labour Party. But its current leader, Keir Starmer, is deeply implicated in the Assange case, as it was during his time as Director of Public Prosecutions that sensitive files on Julian Assange were destroyed for some reason. As Oliver Eagleton wrote for Novara Media, as part of his cooperation with the US, Starmer developed a close and mutually admiring relationship with Eric Holder, the US Attorney General, who in 2010 had authorized several actions aimed at prosecuting the WikiLeaks founder. The sad truth is that a realistic Bond film would see 007 sneaking into a London embassy to kill a journalist that had exposed the disgusting crimes of his own organisation. Now that's a Bond film worthy of Danny Boyle's direction. But if Bond did, however, discover systemic corruption and illegal activity occurring within MI6, what realistically could he do about it? Though his skills of course make him a one-man army, sometimes bashing people's heads in doesn't solve problems. What Bond would need, in that scenario, would be a way to release the information anonymously as a whistleblower. What Bond would need is WikiLeaks.